Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is Nadiya'S with the student number 06011282025044. So today in this video, I will do an individual presentation about our group discussion about analyze news. So the member of our group that are Nadia Kasumulaya, myself, and then Salsa Nadia Cleopatriani, and the last member is that Siti Fauzia Fadila. So before jumping to the news, first we have five news, two news from social media, which is Twitter, and one we have online news, and we have two news from WhatsApp. And to analyze the news, we use four questions. So let's jump to the Twitter news. First, with the news. So here, what is this news? This news is about two students of Bogazici University in Turkey who have been imprisoned for a month because they were participating in protests against the government appointed rector. So let's start with the first question. Why was this material written? What is the purpose? Is the intent to inform, to persuade, to compare, to illustrate, to entertain, or to spur you to action? So, our answer, this material was written because the author wanted to share and to aware people who read this news about the news that happened in Turkey at that moment about two students of Bogazici University who have been imprisoned for a month because they were participating in protests against the government appointed rector. The author also wanted to persuade people to concern more about freedom of speech because in this news they also talk about freedom of speech. And then let's go to the next question. Who is the author? What qualifies this person to write about this subject or this news? Why did the author write this news? How can I find more about the authors? In the front of the Twitter, at the end of the journal article, or on internet, or from my professor, or in the library. So our answer, the author of this news is that Edward Frankel. You can find his name in his Twitter username because we use Twitter here. He qualifies to write this news because he is a professor and he has been visited Bojazic University once to give a public lecture. So he knows a little bit more about Bojazic University because he ever been there. He also a person who support freedom of speech in a good way because he is a professor, so he's qualifies to write to support these two students to give their freedom of speech and to give their usual study. And let's jump to the next question. Might the author be biased? Does the author belong to any group that might influence his point of view? Does the author have anything to gain if I take or the reader take his written as fact? Does the author present both sides of the issue? Does the author omit information that would not support his viewpoint? So we think the author is biased on the side of the student to give the student freedom of speech to criticize their rector. The author, the author will gain many support from the audience to support the student, and also the author acknowledge about freedom of speech to voice it out. And also, I think, or our member group saying, the author do not present both sides because he concerned about two students who have been in person because protesting on the rector. And also, we don't think that the author omit information because we know that this student is just being protest to the rector. And the last question of this Twitter news, who is the author intended audience? How would the audience respond to the material? How would different audience respond? So the author intended people from Bogazici University, not only the student but all of the people who are in the Bogazici University, whether it is university student, or the lecturer or the employee of the university, and also he intended university student and lecturer around the world, all and also all the people in the world to acknowledge them about freedom of speech. The audience will respond by giving their empathy to the student and hope that the student will be free and study as usual because they were in person for a month in the prison. Okay, next is the second reading news. So it's about a minister for employment situation Robert who Shield who doing a blind trust. So let's jump to the first question. Why was this material written and etc.? So our answer is that this material was written because the author wanted to share uh, about blind trust that happened by Minister for Employment Sitward Robert to shield security of his financial dealings. And the second question, the answer. The author is that David Harker. You can find his name in his Twitter username because we got this news from the Twitter. He qualifies to write this news because he has an extensive career as a journalist and broadcaster. So he qualifies to write the news, right? Primarily at the ABC, where he worked on flagship programs such as Four Corners, 7.730 foreign correspondent AM and PM. He also spent 8 years reporting in the Middle East and he also can speak Arabic. So that's why he qualifies to write about this news because for writing news we have to have a journalist or broadcaster field. And third question, might the author be biased? There's no bias in this news because the author just write everything based on fact that the author already investigates. So because he is a journalist, so he write a fact about what happened to the person. And the last question, who is the author intended audience? The author intended people all around the world, especially people who have interested in politics and people will curious about the case because this case is about politics. Let's jump to the online news. So this online news is about Austrian government policy regarding implementation of lockdown. So people who have been vaccinated, they have to be locked down by themselves. So the first question, why this material was written? This material was written because the author wanted to share news about the Australian government policy regarding the implementation of a lockdown for people who are not vaccinated against the coronavirus or COVID-19 virus. Next question. Well, who is the author? Um, as we discovered, there's no the name of the author of this news because the source doesn't clearly state the name of the author, so we cannot recognize who is the author, and we don't know whether the author qualified or not to write this article because this only um, an article from an online news, valid online news. With, but we found that there was a photo of the situation in Vienna, Australia, taken by Lisa Lertner. So in the news, we have a photo there, and then the photo were taken by Lisa Lertner. Lisa Maria Lertner is a Vienna-based photographer with a main focus on reportage and people photography. Graduated from Grabhisch in Vienna, a student at the Vienna University of Business and Economics, a middle distance runner, a former student at the Florida Atlantic University. We found this information on internet. Third question, might the author be biased? So we don't think that the author biased because this article only tells what happened in Australia about vaccinating based on the fact, and also the author used an objective view in this article. And for the last question, who is the author intended audience? The author intended audience is in this article are the Australian citizen because Australian government and the public all over the world because um, people can see and people can imitate the way Austria's government. The RDL would respond by telling people who have not been vaccinated to immediately vaccinated, according to the government advice, so that there is no force for the lockdown. And let's jump to the first WhatsApp news. So here we have a news from WhatsApp, but this news is in Indonesia and Bahasa. So the first news is about a reminder of fake blood checker. The first question: Why was this material written? This material was written because the author wanted to warn people to not get interested in fake blood checker, and also the purpose this writing, uh, uh, of writing this information, also to inform the reader to not easily believe the people who claim themselves as a doctor or a medical student. And then, who is the author? In this news, we do not find the name of the author, and this because this news is being spread by people in WhatsApp, and also in the news, they didn't mention the name of the author. But in the news, they mentioned the place where the flag blood checker happened, but they didn't mention the name of the author again and again. And the third question: might the author be biased? Yes, we think the author biased because, but and also the author influenced people with his argument and data that the author mentioned in the news. This author do not mention both sides because he only support that people to not believing the fake blood checker because he only mentioned the bad side of fake blood checker itself. And who is the author intended audience? Why would the audience respond to the material? And next, the author intended people in the village because who usually got offered by the fake blood checker or fake doctor because in the village, um, that usually this kind of activity happen. The audience who believe this news will respond by avoiding fake blood checker, but different audiences will respond by not directly believing the news, as we know that the news without an author that spread easily from WhatsApp, it's usually a hoax. And let's jump to second WhatsApp news. The news is about avoiding cancer. So this is also from Bahasa. The first question: why was material written? The answer: this material was written because the author wanted to share health information related to cancer, to avoiding cancer. Who is the author? From the news, we found that the author is from Dr. Harrison Joto, but we're not sure whether this news is true or fake news. But in the news that this mentioned that Dr. Hassan Joto, he qualifies to write this news because he is a medical doctor. When we looked for Dr. Hansen Joto on the internet, there is no complete related information unless he is a health doctor from Surabaya. So about the Dr. Hansen Joto, he exists, but we're not sure whether this news is clearly from him or just people using his name for the news. The third question: might the author be biased? So I think the author might be biased because the content of the whole material present both side. Do not present both side because he trying to persuade people to not to doing these things to avoiding cancer. So in the news also he mentioned about eating fruits, how to eat fruits so we can avoid cancer or things like that. And who is the other intended audience? The other intended audience in this article is the public who got this news. The audience will respond by following and implementing the doctor advice to avoid the cancer by the way they eat the fruit, and also the different audience will respond by do not believing this news directly or check more about the news because as usual we know that WhatsApp news sometimes hoax news. So that's all for my individual presentation today. I'm sorry for any mistake or an inconvenience from my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Again, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.